Hello, everyone. It is fantastic to be here with you on a sunny Friday afternoon. My name is Katie Bruno, and I am a financial planner with Maureen Quinn Wealth Partners. We are a team of independent financial advisors located right here in Omaha, Nebraska. Today, we are going to be talking about some information that has the potential to significantly affect the future well-being of your children. And for some of you, that may be your grandchildren, your nieces, your nephews, and your friends. I'm going to share with you some tools and concepts that you can use when talking to kids about money, and hopefully take them away and use them immediately for some results. I do record these presentations, and they are going to be available for replay on my YouTube page. It's Katie Bruno at Maureen Quinn Wealth Partners. That's the YouTube page name. Feel free to rewatch it or share it with someone who you think it could benefit from. I'd also like to give a shout out to the Zella Wellaway. This is a company and an organization that's focused on bringing financial education to people of all ages. They have a kid series that's specifically designed for children, and many of the tools and concepts that I'm going to share with you today are taken from their program. What do parents want for their families? I am sure that many of you feel that raising kids in today's world is one of the most difficult things that you do. We want our children to live extraordinary lives, and we know that our guidance has a lot to do with who they become. We want to send them out into the world very prepared, and in order to do that, we have to teach them things. Money affects us every single day of our lives. Studies show that by early high school, your child is going to make a minimum of 6 to 10 financial decisions a day. And so we need to equip our children with financial skills. And this means talking about money, and it's not about being rich, it's about being enriched. So in today's discussion, we're going to talk about the urgency. We train our children, or we are trained to keep our children safe from physical harm, but we also need to consider the financial harm, like massive debt or bankruptcy. Financial problems can lead to a whole host of other problems, including depression or health or psychological problems. I'm going to go through how to teach and give you some tools and strategies that you can hopefully start to use. I'm going to talk about allowance. Should you do allowance or should you not? And how should you handle allowance? And then the last thing I'll cover is just some damaging mistakes that we've seen to avoid. Our youth today need help. By the time a child is 5 years old, they will have been hit with 30,000 advertisements. Marketing companies use strong psychological marketing tactics to try to win a part of their markets. It's not our kids' fault that they want things. There are hundreds of millions of dollars being spent on getting our children's attention. Children really do have significant influence on the American economy. Student loan debt. Student loan debt nationally is over $1.5 trillion, surpassing credit card debt of $900 million. Credit card debt number is high enough. The student loan debt number is just ridiculously high. We owe it to our children to help them learn how to effectively deal with their desires, because they do have a result on finances. The Institute for College Access and Success states that from 2004 to 2014, students' average debt at graduation rose 56%. And this was a study in 2014, so I'm sure today in 2020 we're sitting at an even higher number, but that's students walking away with only almost $30,000 worth of debt. And that doesn't necessarily mean student loan debt. That's a combination of student loans, credit cards, car loans. That number encompasses any debt they may carry. So we have an urgency to teach our children money skills for many reasons. One, the technology and speed of life makes it easier and faster to spend. We are thrown an excess of information to us every day, and because technology and because of the information that's available to us, we tend to put less thought and emotion into where we spend our money. It's also using less cash, and cash triggers a pain mechanism in the brain. Plastic or waving a phone does not. And so some of the reason that we're spending more has to do with the fact that it's so easy to slide a credit card or insert your banking information into the computer to purchase something. We also have a societal attitude, the I deserve it. I mean, I am guilty of doing this. If I lose this much weight, then I owe it to myself to buy a new pair of shoes. I deserve it. That type of mindset. And then there's the mom's teacher role. Although children go to both parents for money questions, we tend to see them go to their moms slightly more. And so if moms aren't comfortable talking about money, then we create a negative cycle that just spreads from generation to generation. So why aren't parents talking to their kids about money? 95% of parents surveyed said they felt that talking to their kids about money skills would help the economy, but only 18% were actually doing it. And the reasons that parents cited they weren't talking to their kids about money is because they lacked confidence, they felt uncomfortable, they didn't know how to talk about money, lack of guidance, or they didn't know where to start. Starting young is critical because a person's money wiring in their brain occurs very early in childhood. The most powerful forms of learning during those young years are done by modeling and observation. So whether we realize it, the way we talk about our money, the way we shop, the way we deal with decisions around money, our children are all taking that in, and it's being done subconsciously. And this is why the programming is so strongly defined in adulthood and can be hard to change, because we're already wired to think a certain way. So usually by the age of 2 or 3, your child is learning how to count. They usually know how to count well by the age of 5. And then by the age of 7, they start to understand the concept of value. So knowing that the difference between 5 pennies versus a quarter. A 5-year-old may think that 5 pennies is more money than a quarter. But usually by the age of 7, they start to understand the value, and they will realize that a quarter or a dollar is more than 5 pennies. Young children are interested and have no fear of the topic. Kids are okay going through the awkward stage of learning something new. Children give themselves permission to do this, but when they get older, they become more embarrassed, and they don't want to go through that awkward stage of making mistakes and learning something new, and they have fear. Young kids don't say, "I'm not smart enough." Young kids don't have the fear. They never say, "I'm not good at math, I can't do this." And then lastly, it's so important because schools do not have comprehensive financial programs. Some schools offer financial literacy or financial concepts as an elective. Some schools require it, but it's not mandated at this point. So it will be helpful when schools teach kids because schools have the resources and the comfort level and the vocabulary to discuss this with children, but currently they don't. So we have a responsibility as parents and grandparents to give our children this guidance. We can also provide something that schools can't, and that's the hands-on practice. So who's going to be easier to teach? Your teenagers who are experiencing an increase in peer pressure and do not want to spend time with their parents, or your young children who can't get enough of you, who want more time together, who have a strong desire to learn? And I think we all know the answer to that question, that the earlier we start, the easier it's going to be to do it. And there's really no one big thing. It's all about the little things. Financial success is based on thousands of decisions made on a daily basis over time. The best way to learn is to teach. And so this is a way for you as a parent to focus on your financial habits. And the earlier you start, the easier it's going to be for your kids to learn those good habits and not have to change bad ones. What trait in children predicts financial success? So there are some books out there, the Millionaire Next Door and the Next Millionaire Next Door, and they spend a lot of time discovering what traits millionaires carry. And the number one trait that studies have shown that people who are financially successful carry is actually self-control and discipline. Self-control has been found to be more important than the socioeconomic status you were born with, than your IQ or any type of grade that you could get in a classroom. And the primary way that we enhance our self-control is through saving. This is one of the best methods that is out there to delay gratification and develop some sort of self-control. Studies show that children who learn self-control and discipline early in life tend to have a more positive, motivated, persistent outlook, especially when faced with challenges. They understand the delay in gratification and that they have to work for something to receive the reward. And this is a very key element of success. Children who do not master self-discipline tend to be more troubled or stubborn or indecisive or even lack confidence during the teen years and adulthood. So as you can see from these results, it's better to start the education during the preschool years as opposed to high school. If you're listening to this and you have preteens or teens, don't freak out. There are still things that you can do. I'm going to talk about them later. One thing I'd like to say as a parent is don't feel like you need to be the financial expert to help your children learn about managing money. You don't. The key is committing to taking action, taking responsibility. We need to give our children opportunities to learn. And if we know that our children are going to be responsible for their own future and that we have given them good tools, they're going to make better decisions all throughout their lives. And they won't be looking for someone else to be dependent on, whether that's you or the government. Our children are going to have the opportunity to be leaders because of these life opportunities and these things that they have learned. And so we must connect the concept of being responsible with money. And it's also going to require you to deal effectively with societal pressure and peer pressure. Bad things can happen when parents don't make their children be responsible for their actions because they have money. So it's going to force some parents to have a shift in that parental mindset. Like, I'm not going to give my kid everything they want, and you'll see, I love you, so here you are, to I love and respect you, so I'm going to teach you how to earn it. And this is also going to show the child that you believe they're capable of doing something. So how do you teach your child financial skills effectively? Well, the basis of learning: awareness, experience, emotion, relevance, comparisons, and lastly, repetition. You have to repeat it. The brain needs repetition to learn things. So this is Dale's cone of experience. And when Dale introduced his cone of experience, he believed that this chart would be used as a way to understand how we learn and what the best ways are to apply. And so you've probably heard this before, that people generally remember 10% of what they read, 20% of what they hear, 30% of what they see, 50% of what they hear and see, 70% of what they say and write, and 90% of what they do. So the biggest thing is that visualizing it and doing things is the way we have to move from just thinking about an idea to actually doing it. We retain 90% of what we both say and do. And by, let's say, just applying the principle to earning an income, we learn just how important it is to take ownership of knowledge and begin to make money. So there's no doubt that this requires time, energy, and lots of efforts, but progressing through the levels of learning and achieving actual action is the best way to solidify your knowledge about any subject. Critical information in all areas involving education at home and in the business world is important. Children need to experience learning, and that's the deepest level of learning. So how do you do it? Well, first of all, children need tangible visual experiences with money to truly understand the exchange. By actually having cash, your child's number skills are going to be increased, and this is going to prepare them to be able to use debit cards and credit cards effectively because they understand the exchange of money. Tell stories. The last 45 minutes of your day has a huge impact on your sleep and your next day. Your subconscious mind actually replays and processes our late night input up to 6 times more than anything else a person has experienced in their day. And that's why watching a scary movie right before you go to bed can give you nightmares, but it's also why cramming for exams work. And that is why bedtime stories for children are so important. It's not just about helping your child fall asleep, but it's about the repeated messages, the morals, the lessons of the story, because they become a part of the fabric of the child's consciousness. And so what your child is exposed to the last 45 minutes before sleep is so critical. So incorporate storytelling and incorporate money into your storytelling. You can tell your children stories, or you can encourage your children to create their own stories and use their imagination. Making mistakes while risks are low is far better than making mistakes as an adult. It's also very important when your child makes a mistake on how you address it with your words. Learning from mistakes is critical, but it's important that you are not critical. Criticism can lead to failure and the failure of trying new things. So just think about the difference in the way these sentences sound. You need to, or what I did when I faced that challenge was. So just these two ways of wording it lets them choose if they want to listen. Kids are going to listen to you anyway, but one way doesn't make them feel resistant. Struggles and challenges and making mistakes are what lead to growth and success. And self-esteem is truly built by overcoming challenges in your life. So we've talked about cash and stories and mistakes, and lastly, opportunities for hands-on experiences. So activities and discussions that you have with your child is going to help them learn the habits that serve them a lifetime of benefits. And so one way that I'm going to talk about on how to teach your child to manage their money is using the GIS method, which is give 10%, invest 15%, save 25%, and spend 50%. And we're going to talk about each one of these. We know that high net worth individuals use their income for several different purposes. And these 4 categories are quite often the money they are using it for. We also know that basic number skills are lacking in our youth, and that good habits are easier to begin when you're young versus trying to change bad habits when you're old. This method provides a simple framework to address all these factors. Each category here plays a very vital role in your child's understanding of the various ways that money can be used. We divide up the money, and it gives the child practice of doing that, and it's going to create positive results over and over. Repetition, one of the most critical elements of learning. So give. Give is 10%. This is an ancient concept often referred to as tithing, which means a tenth. It's a very valuable concept for children to learn early on, because as they begin to give to various causes, they become aware of the concept of their ability to help others and that they can make a difference. Increased engagement in our world is related to happiness, just as good relationships and experience are. Research shows that giving a relative a small gift of $5 or $20 makes a person happier than receiving one of the same amount. And this was research that was done by Jennifer Akar, and she's the author of the book, The Dragonfly Effect. And so this is actually contrary to what people in the test thought would make them happy. People thought that they would be happy receiving, but they were actually more happy giving. Invest 15%. Investing is an abstract concept for really young children, but it can be learned gradually. Initially, this segment can be explained as the money your child uses to grow for when they are older. The key here is that they get in the habit of having money dedicated to their non-working years and to understand that this is money they want to grow. And I'll just say young adults have virtually no concept of how to plan their futures. There was a T. Rowe Price survey that says more kids believe they will make $1 million by becoming famous than by investing in stocks and bonds, which if you read research on the habits of millionaires, most of them are not famous, and most of them did not inherit the money or win what I call the womb lottery. They worked, they had discipline, and they had self-control, and they invested. Save 25%. So this is the money that the child gets to save for something special. As a child works towards a specific goal, whether it's saving for a new bike or a new toy, they learn these action steps that they need to take to achieve goals. And when they do achieve the goal, the self-esteem they feel can be very, very powerful. It shows children what they're capable of, and it makes them feel more confident, which allows us to set bigger goals. Saving also helps teach delaying gratification, which is a very important part of emotional development. Giving kids everything they want as they grow up often leads them to feeling very unsatisfied and unfulfilled. So saving and achieving your own success on your own goals is going to lead you to be more confident, and it's going to lead you to keep going, take more action to see more results. And then spending. This is the 50% category, and this is a category that helps children learn how their actions have consequences, sometimes positive and sometimes negative. Once children use their own money for their purchases, they start to think about the cost and the value of things. And it's much better for a young child to have a chance to handle money and make mistakes with a few dollars than it is for you to raise your child, send them off to college, and then expect them to know or learn on their own. Children need that opportunity to learn how to handle and make good decisions. And one of the most important financial skills that you want your child to learn is how to spend their money wisely. They're also going to learn about the opportunity cost for paying for items when they do it themselves. They don't learn opportunity costs if their parents take care of everything. So is it a need or a want? How many weeks of allowance does this cost? And have I found the best price? These are questions that your child will start to ask when they have the opportunity to spend their own money. What about allowances? So one of the most talked about topics in children's personal finance, and it's also one of the most divided, is allowances. And allowance is really the practice of saving and spending. Allowances really give your child the practice of saving and spending and making decisions, because you're giving them the money and then they have the purchasing power. So there is an author, Daniel Pink, and he wrote a book called The Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us. And in this book, he talks about the concept of allowance, chores, money, and why linking allowance to chores is not good for kids. He writes that by linking money to the completion of chores, parents turn an allowance into an if-then reward. This sends kids a clear and clearly wrong-headed message. In the absence of payment, no self-respecting child would willingly set the table, empty the garbage, or make their own bed. It converts moral and familial obligation into just another commercial transaction, and it teaches that the only reason to do a less than desirable task for your family is in exchange for payment. The other factor to consider here is that some children are not motivated by money. If they only get paid for doing chores and they have no interest in doing them, then they're not going to get that vital experience they need in managing and counting their own money. All that being said, there are also numerous experts who believe allowances should be tied to chores, and there are many who believe it shouldn't be. So there are certainly many ways that you can set up an allowance system. So you can have allowance without expectations. This is unconditional, no requirements. You give your child a set amount of money per week, bi-weekly, or monthly. You can do an allowance tied to specific actions, so chores like we talked about, grades, or behavior. And then there's also no allowance, where you just pay for things that your kid wants or that you think they need. So the Zellawella way is they recommend avoiding paying for personal and family responsibilities. So certain clothing that is a necessity, lunch money, things, maybe personal care items would fit into there. That allowance should not be, you should not give your child an allowance to pay for those items. Don't suspend allowance as a form of punishment. And then lastly, don't bail them out if they've spent all their allowance. So J.D. Rockefeller, who was a businessman, he came up with this approach called the mini allowance. And I find that this is a very effective approach, and it's very simple. And I think that simplicity is a key here for having a successful teaching method. So it involves giving your child a small amount of money each weekly, so that they can learn to manage it. And if they want to earn more money to buy something specific, then they need to find their own ways to supplement their allowance. And that might be doing an odd job. So for example, how much do you give? One rule of thumb out there is $1 for each year of age. So for a 12-year-old, that's $12 a week. Another rule of thumb out there is to give your child half of their age. So a 12-year-old would be $6 a week. I think this depends on what you're expecting your child to pay for. And so I think that you need to have a conversation and write down what things you'll pay for and what things the child is expected to pay for. Because if you were to give your teenager $5 for their expenses and then expect them to pay for their lunch, it's not going to work, and it's going to frustrate your child. So having clear guidelines on what the money is meant to cover. And then giving them that money, and then knowing they can earn extra money by doing extra jobs. Maybe that's raking the leaves or washing the car, or cleaning up the yard. So some people have asked, how do I give them the money? Well, there are two things that you could do to help your children get the most out of their allowance and create a learning experience. One is to maybe use coins for the first few years, especially if you have younger children. And this way they can learn to identify and count and add and subtract money in a real life situation. And make sure that when you give the allowance in coins, you're giving it in different combinations. And so this is going to help their number skills. There are a lot of preteens and teens out there that currently don't know how to make change. And that's because they've never handled cash. They say they have never handled cash because their parents only use debit and credit cards. Don't make this mistake with your children. Secondly, use the gifts method: giving, investing, saving, and spending. Use the 4 categories, and by separating their money each week, that gives you the opportunity to talk to them about the choices that they get to make with their money. The act of dividing their allowance shows that money isn't just for spending. Each category that we talked about, there's a critical lesson to be learned. So when should you give it? Well, the short answer is whenever it's convenient for you and when you will remember to do it. So some parents don't want to give their children the allowance on a Friday because they know they'll blow it over the weekend. So you could opt for a Sunday or Monday, and then you know that the dollars are not going to disappear in just 2 days. It's important that you give the money to your child on a day when you have time to discuss it, especially those 4 categories. Help them count out the money and just making it a relaxed and enjoyable experience for everyone involved. Also, you want to make sure that you remember to do it weekly. It's the repetition and the practice that helps internalize these practices. And if you forget to do it, you're showing your child that you don't think it's that important. So I would put on your calendar, write in big, bold ink, allowance, so that your child sees it and you see it and you're on the same page. And then the last thing is, people will ask, well, when do I increase it? Well, most parents increase allowance annually. And they talk to their child about that, so it's clear that raises aren't an ongoing negotiation between parent and child. But choose something that's appropriate for your family. So it might be on the birthdays, it might be at the beginning of a school year, it might be at the beginning of the calendar year, so whatever that is. I do think that you should increase the amount of allowance, especially as your child goes from their primary years into those preteen years. But I also think it's very important that you are talking about what the allowance is meant to cover and what expenses they have. You could also then shift to doing the allowance maybe every 2 weeks instead of every week, so that they become more effective at planning their expenses and learning the cash flow component. So in summary, I think there are numerous benefits of giving an allowance to your child. They're going to learn how to make decisions with money, and they understand the consequences of the choices of how they use their money. They're going to regularly handle money. Again, there's the repetition. They're going to count it and they're going to plan. And they also get to learn about saving, so setting and achieving different goals. Damaging mistakes to avoid. First one, assuming someone else is going to teach your child about money, or talking about money negatively. These go hand in hand. They're almost just as bad. You want to make sure that because you are the model that kids learn from in all major categories of their life, that you're talking about money and you're talking about it positively. It's also critical that we allow our children to make decisions on their own, so that they can learn from their experiences and understand the outcomes of their decisions. It is our decisions and not our conditions that determine the quality of our lives. And if we want our children to live out their dreams, we have to give them the opportunity to develop their capabilities and believe in themselves. Overindulging children with stuff, don't do that. Don't buy your child everything they want. But when but it's also important not to just shut them down with a quick yes or no. So it's important not to overindulge, but it's also important in how you shut them down. So it's much more effective if you say, well, it's not in our budget, but you could add it to your wish list and think about some ways you could earn the money for it. So no, we can't afford it phrase really has long-lasting emotional effects in confusion if then you start going shopping for something else and the child is going to pick up on that incongruence. Well, they can't afford that, but they can afford that. Eventually your child is going to pick up on those things. So teaching financial skills can also benefit you. You play a critical role. You can change your child's destiny and that of their children and create this virtuous financial cycle for each generation versus creating a vicious cycle. And there are also benefits to you. Passing along your wisdom is going to force you to clarify your own ideas or confront your own inconsistencies in your thinking. But most importantly, it's going to require you to walk your talk, require you to read, study, and speak the information over and over again. And that repetition is going to force your own learning. The best way to accelerate learning is to become a teacher. So I always like to end the webinar with some things that you can take away and work on now. So next steps, commit now to being a child's financial teacher. The only person who can really teach your child to manage money by their values and with responsibility is you. So I'd ask that everyone listening today commits 100% to being their child's #1 financial teacher. Simply being transparent with your child about the realities and the cost of items and the cost of living can go a long way in preparing them. Even if your child is in their teens, it's not too late. The way you may teach them may need to be altered, but it's never too late. Pick one simple topic. And so right now, as we're experiencing the coronavirus outbreak or COVID-19, it might be appropriate to talk to your child about what happens when people lose their jobs, which could lead you to why having a savings is important, or maybe talking about ways the family can save money, or maybe talk about ways the family can give and why giving is so important. I know families that during the holidays, before their child gets new gifts, they go through all of their toys at home and they pick out toys that they can give to children who may not have as many toys of them. And I think that's a great idea and to talk about giving. Or maybe it's using some of their allowance to purchase a child a gift that may not have one. And help your child open the savings and investing accounts using the GIST method. So you need to have a way to save and you need to have a way to invest. You could start with the savings method, especially if you're doing the coins with a simple mason jar. But as you start to give your child a higher allowance, a savings account may be appropriate. And lastly, share your own tips on managing a budget or a spending plan. Introduce your child to the concept of paying bills. And that doesn't mean that your child pays the bills, but if you have an idea, if you have your bills or your household bills on auto pay, you could take them off. And each month when you get the light bill or the water bill or the phone bill, you could sit down with your child and they can open the bills and look at how much they are, and you can log them with the computer and show them the process of paying bills. And I think it creates an awareness of how much things really cost. A child may not understand the concept of when you say, turn the lights off, or wasn't born in a barn, or things like those phrases, what they actually mean when they see how much it costs to keep the lights on in your house. And those are easy things that you can do to help teach your children. And so I know I gave a lot of information. Learning financial life skills is a journey, and it's a journey for all of us. And it takes steps, and it takes progressive steps that continue to build upon one another. It's not going to happen overnight and all at one time. So give yourself some grace along the way. But I hope that you found some of the things I said to encourage you or to start something new. And if you want to talk further about it or go deeper into something I said or bounce ideas, I'm happy to do that. Just reach out. I've provided my contact information here. I am going to stop recording, but take questions. Thank you and have a good weekend.